morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Tomorrow is the official start of Comic-Con. It unofficially starts this evening. But I've actually managed to put together a little bit of a palate cleanser for you with 3 non-comic book stories. Although, because we are heading into Comic-Con, the viewer question is comic book related. So let's begin as we freshen ourselves for at least 3 to 4 days of pure, undistilled comic book and blockbuster news. All right, so the first story, you might have heard this story break last week. I've been waiting to find a place to put it on the schedule here on Morning Movie News, and that's the news that Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt will reteam again, just like they did it in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, quite successfully so in that instance, but they're going to reteam again in a smaller film called By the Sea for Universal. And not just Universal, but producer Donna Langley. And that's the team behind Unbroken. So Angelina Jolie, I guess, is having a very good time working with them and feels comfortable, signing back up for another tour of duty with Universal and Donna Langley. And she's not only written By the Sea for her and Brad Pitt, but she will be directing it, and they will both be producing it. Now, Brad Pitt, I think we've all come to understand, is a fantastic producer. He did a great job shepherding World War Z through a very rough patch, when he and his fellow filmmakers realized it had problems and needed to be reworked, and they did it. They pulled it off. And of course, he got his first Oscar, and not for acting, but for producing with 12 Years a Slave. So I think he's a very savvy and talented producer. So with him being on the project, I feel a little better. Angelina Jolie, I think, is extremely hit or miss. I think she sometimes misses the forest for the trees in terms of art and commercialism. So I wouldn't feel so great about her just being solely in charge of something. We'll see how she does with Unbroken. Perhaps she has a little bit more help this time, kind of guiding her to make a more competitive mainstream film. We'll see how that turns out. But Brad Pitt, I think, is even for his partner in life, I don't think is going to jeopardize his career to that degree. This might be a little bit of an art house film. It's supposed to be a small film that could be shot very quickly, so I guess it's not too much of a risk. But I guess it's time for them to re-team up again, and I think they get a lot of the star power that Jolie and Pitt have is because of their tabloid personas. Even when their films don't do well at the box office, although Pitt is on quite a roll these days. But even when they don't bring on those box office numbers, they're still names because of their tabloid presence. They're, Hollywood royalty to some degree. They always get people's attention. So I think that they need to keep that going. They need to keep the tabloid aspects going. So I think that's why you'll occasionally see them shake things up. But they're not shaking it up with a marriage. They keep promising a wedding, but where is this wedding? I think they so don't want to actually get married that they're like, let's just make another movie together. Now, I'm sure that Universal and Pitt and Jolie are hoping that this will be another Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But I think they need to realize that there was a lot going on there that won't be going on here. First of all, that was an action movie, and with Angelina Jolie at that time, who was at the top of her game in terms of being an action heroine. Of course, with the Tomb Raider movies, etc. She's doing very well. And also, they were like, oh, it's the 2 most beautiful people in Hollywood in a movie together for the first time. But at this point, we've seen them together a lot, so kind of the novelty is worn off. And then also, of course, there was the fact that they had very publicly gotten together, they'd hooked up. Angelina Jolie is a master of publicity, and she, of course, had told the paparazzi she would be on a beach with Brad Pitt and her son Maddox at the time when he was still married to Jennifer Aniston. And those pictures were, of course, seen across the world, and they did that W cover spread where they played a married couple, and that's what led to the "he doesn't have a sensitivity chip" comment from Jennifer Aniston about it at her then time husband. It was all quite melodramatic, quite, the gossip, and I think it brought a lot of attention to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And again, I wouldn't put it past Angelina Jolie to realize that. And I like Angelina Jolie. I think she was fantastic in Maleficent, but you need to understand who you're dealing with, and that is an extremely savvy promoter. Very good. I think she really knows how to promote herself and what roles to pick. And look how she very cleverly agreed to do Maleficent, which turned out to be, once again, the right move for her. So, and apparently she hasn't really lost any fans either. I mean, I know a lot of people at the time were like, I will never watch an Angelina Jolie movie. I'm on Team Aniston. But, that kind of division kind of faded away. So, and I think everybody wanted to see Mr. and Mrs. Smith to be like, oh, do I see the spark of romance? Do I see why they got together? I don't think it ever really showed up in the film, and Angelina Jolie actually ended up having a pretty small part in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. It was largely Brad Pitt's movie, as he dealt with finding out all this stuff about his wife, that she too was an assassin. It's a pretty good movie. It's not a great movie, but I think it makes for a great rental, a great airplane film. It's just, a by-the-numbers solid movie with tremendous star power. And, those can do quite well and be very well received and sometimes enjoyable to watch. So we'll see if By the Sea does well. I'll be very curious. You don't want a situation where it's self-indulgent filmmaking. Nobody wants to watch, for instance, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie both consider themselves to be artists, and I think there's a case to be made for them being artists. But for instance, remember Brad Pitt did all those, he's like, I'm a photographer, and he takes a bunch of pictures of Angelina Jolie in their everyday life, eating a hamburger, feeding our baby. And you're like, these are just your, it might be Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's home movies, but it's still being asked to watch somebody else's home movie. So I hope that they can sidestep, perhaps that, remember Guy Ritchie Madonna movie they made together when they were a couple, and everyone was like, this is horrible. I believe it was swept away. I don't think anybody wants to see that. So I have faith in Universal, I have faith in Donna Langley, and I have faith in Brad Pitt. And Jolie, I think that all those people will make sure she stays on track. But I'm curious, are you at all interested in another reteaming on the screen, the silver screen, of Jolie and Pitt? Or do you think this is just something that they're making for themselves? All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day is a matchup, one movie versus another that you would not expect, but I think it speaks to this growing trend of women in film and female audiences becoming quite powerful. And as we've discussed recently, with some box office coverage, becoming the most reliable movie audience, women. For that, it used to be young men, but now it turns out that it's women, which is fascinating. Actually, someone sent me, I believe it was Nicholas Yanes, sent me a Hollywood, Nicholas Yanes, a lot of you send me stories, by the way, which I really appreciate, because sometimes I miss them. And even if I don't cover them, that I save them for another day, etc., or I reference them like this. But one of the reasons that Frozen did so well in Japan, again, was because of the female audience. So this isn't just an American phenomenon, this is a global phenomenon. But anyway, so what's the matchup? It is Jennifer Lawrence versus Sandra Bullock. Two America sweethearts. The eternal America sweetheart versus the new one. And they're both doing it about kitchen appliances. Now, of course, we've already discussed the Miracle Mop movie that Jennifer Lawrence is making with David O. Russell. It'll be their third time teaming up after Silver Linings Playbook and American Hustle. And it's basically, I think, going to be her American Hustle character that's just blown up into her own movie. Not the exact same character, but that kind of role, so she can kind of tap the same well. And it's basically that woman who invented the Miracle Mop was a single mom on Long Island, apparently, and this will be about her rise to success. And, of course, it's your typical rise to success stories with the highs and the lows. But then Sandra Bullock has come out of nowhere for Sony. It was a bidding war to get this project for a Tupperware movie. Now, this character, Brownie Wise, didn't invent Tupperware, but she's the one who brilliantly promoted it with Tupperware, tea parties, I believe, etc. She was a divorcee out of Detroit, and she convinced Rubbermaid, or the company, whatever company was managing Tupperware at the time, to let her promote this in her own unique way. And she was so successful that she was the first woman ever to be on the cover of Business Week. And I think this is all fascinating to showcase women in these environments being businesswomen, but still, and I think in a somewhat palatable fashion of in the kitchen. It's like I stayed in the kitchen, I got back in the kitchen, but I invented something while I was there, or I came up with a business proposal. And I'll be interested to see how these movies do. Now, I think some women will be like, and my first instincts are like, does it have to be kitchen appliances that they invented? But I think that, that's in this, especially these time frames, these are going to be period pieces. That's where women were. So they looked around and they worked with what they had at their disposal. So I think it's really impressive. Although maybe I think for a third film, she recently passed away, but the inventor of Kevlar, which makes bulletproof vests and many other things, was a woman. I think that's fascinating. She accidentally discovered it, but instead of throwing away her accident, she examined it, looked further into it, and found that she'd developed Kevlar. So that's fascinating. I think you should look that up if you're interested in those kinds of stories. So I'm curious to know what you guys think. Do you think these are good projects for Bullock and Lawrence? Who will win? Do you think this is do we all win and this is a direction that movies are going? Or do you think these movies will just fall away? I mean, these kind of films are, sometimes they don't connect with audiences. For instance, while David O. Russell is directing the Miracle Mop movie, which I think will help that phenomenally, the director of the Sandra Bullock Tupperware project is Tate Taylor, who did The Help and now Get On Up. And I think he's a little bit of a harder sell, and I think The Help just kind of lucked into its success. I think it was, all the pieces were in the right place. But I don't see that coming to fruition for Get On Up. So we'll see. But I mean, like, if you take The Help and you make it about Tupperware, I guess that's a good question. Can Tate Taylor make a different kind of movie, or will it just be The Help with Tupperware? Although don't underestimate the power of Sandra Bullock. She is very powerful with audiences and having a connection and getting people into the theater. Very, very good. And I wonder if Jennifer Lawrence has that, if it's not The Hunger Games. We haven't seen her be able to flex any box office muscle outside of already established franchises or franchises that kind of have a life of their own. I'm talking about, of course, Hunger Games and X-Men. So that'll be a very interesting test. But she's in good hands with O. Russell, and it should at least get some awards nominations. Now, the third story of the day is that they're going to make a third, so I guess it's fitting that this is where it is, a third Best Man movie. Malcolm D. Lee has signed on to write and direct the third Best Man, the Best Man Wedding. Now, the first one was also about a wedding, I believe, and of course the second one was about the holidays. It was the Best Man holiday. It was about Christmas. And I didn't see the first Best Man, but I did see the second one, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought it was a very well-made film. I'm surprised Malcolm D. Lee has no other projects he's working on. He's only going to do this one. It's set for April 15th, 2016. You would think he would add something else to his slate. Maybe it's going to take him a while to write this. I don't know. But I would think that he's had so much success with these films. It would be nice to see him try to apply it to moving his career forward and a little outside of his comfort zone. I think that, as we've discussed before, this movement of the success of black cinema and being less black and more mainstream, I think there, of course, in the 70s was a lot of, blaxploitation flicks that were very successful in their own right. But I think now we want to see this kind of a mix. We want to see the segregation of the movies go away. And I think for that to work, this talent needs to, both sides need to reach across the aisle. And so I would like to see Malcolm D. Lee, just do this, but also go into a different direction as well. Just like Will Packer is doing, very prolific producer of Kevin Hart's movies with The Wedding Ringer, Josh Gad, etc. So anyway, this is called The Best Man Wedding, and it's going to be about some unexpected nuptials. And I bet that it's going to be Shelby's nuptials. That sounds very funny to me. And maybe it's a good thing it's coming at 2016, because we just had Think Like a Man 2, which also dealt with weddings. A lot of wedding movies. But I mean, they do pretty well, and The Best Man holiday did very well at the box office. It opened with $30 million, which surprised a lot of people, and then it went on to do $70 million worldwide off of a $17 million budget. That's very strong. It's not phenomenal, but it's very strong, and I'm sure it performs quite well on streaming, hotels, all those ancillary markets. So I think that it's a no-brainer to do a third film, and I'm curious. But I'm curious to know if you guys want to watch a third film. Do you want to see another Best Man movie, or do you want to see more of a mix? Do you want to see these talents that have come up with these movies move more into the mainstream, into the group? We're seeing so much more diversity, and not globally and racially and ethnically. What do you think of someone, Malcolm D. Lee just staying his own personal course outside of everything else? So I'm just curious to what you think of that, and just in general, Malcolm D. Lee and this genre in general. I know you guys, some people are going to say, oh, it's not its own genre, etc., etc. But I think until they become more mixed, and I think that the Think Like a Man 2 did take a lot of steps in that direction. But I want to reiterate, just in case people didn't see what I said there, the reason these films seem segregated is because they're self-aware. There are a lot of jokes about being black, how black, being separate from white people, jokes about white people being different. It's not just a movie. However, I would say that Ride Along, maybe perhaps was successful for this reason, was not like that. It was not self-referential. It wasn't self-aware. It just was a movie, and the two main characters happened to be black. And I like that film quite a bit, and I'm very excited for Ride Along too. All right, so let's move on to that comic book viewer question. This is from Bartholomew's Channel, and aka Ben. And he says, here's my question. First time asker, so I don't expect you to reply in the slightest smiley face. But he says at the end, this is the first time he ever thought of anything worthy to ask. So that's why he wanted to put it up there. So I thought that was fun. And I think it is a good question, and it's very timely. So good job constructing your question, Ben. So Ben says, Guardians of the Galaxy is approaching us, which is a mostly little-known comic book adapted onto the big screen. True, very obscure, even in comic book circles. There has been much discussion about the gamble of this project due to nobody knowing who the Guardians are. In fact, my dad the other day said to me, hey, have you seen these new trailers for Marvel with the raccoon laughing? That Rocket Raccoon, looks like he is going to deliver. So anyway, Ben continues saying, my question is this. What do you think the outcome will be for Marvel and the film business in general if Guardians of the Galaxy succeeds or flops? And then, let's see here. bonus question, what other obscure Marvel or DC comic title would you like to see adapted to the big screen? I'm not going to answer that one, but I wanted to throw it out there if anyone else wanted to answer it, any obscure titles they'd like to see on the big screen, because I think it's going to take enough of our time to answer Ben's first question. So let's take it from either side, all right? Succeeds and flops. Let's start with succeeds. If it succeeds, if Guardians of the Galaxy is a success, it will show that Marvel truly can do anything, and they just have their finger on the pulse of the moviegoer. And that's something, was discussed. It was an excuse that was brought up recently for why movies aren't doing so well. There's a disjoint between what the suits think moviegoers want to see and what moviegoers actually want to see. And I think a success here would show that Marvel is the exception and understands. I also think this would be another knock against DC, because it would be like DC is still struggling to get their main characters right, their iconic characters, whereas Marvel is doing so well and so strongly that they can even take these obscure characters that nobody knows and make them a success. I also think that if this is a success, you'll see the Marvel Cinematic Universe push further into space. Thanos, of course, is the villain they're working towards. Of course, it's very crucial that this film is somewhat successful because Thanos is supposed to be that big bad for Avengers 3, so they need to make sure that his movie isn't a flop where he's first really strongly introduced. But I think you'll see more space adventures. You might see other Avengers going to space, and that's tricky to pull off. It's even not so well liked in the comics. I think that some people like those. There's like a whole term for it. I forget the name of it. It's like the Marvel Space Adventure or something, and they have like their space titles. And sometimes they're okay. That used to involve the Inhumans, but they're a tough sell at any level. And I think it's one thing to have superheroes, but superheroes in space seems to get a little too fantastical. But if this succeeds, you'll start to see your Avengers, your favorite Avengers, Black Widow, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, heading on up into the stars, which is, I think, very interesting. Also, it'll create two competing space franchises for Disney in-house, Star Wars and Guardians of the Galaxy, / Marvel. And you have to wonder what that will do, if it will detract at all from the interest in a new Star Wars trilogy. So also, if it succeeds, one negative aspect would be that I think it would show that this Marvel Studios was truly separate and totally not dependent at all on the comics. Because look, this is an obscure comic that the Marvel comic book division was never able to really do anything with. It had its cult fan base, but I think it will show that we don't have to listen to what you're saying. We're just going to comb through the material that you do have, but let's not forget that the movies are the horse leading the cart. We're in charge. We're the engine. And I think this is just going to further deteriorate the quality of the comics, which I've said, and some of you have agreed, have really turned into just promotional pamphlets for the movies, or just to keep the discussion going in between movies. They don't exist in their own right anymore, which I think is quite sad. Although I still am reading Marvel comics, while I've largely stopped reading DC. So I think that's all if it succeeds. Also, Chris Pratt. It's going to help Jurassic World. That'll be a side effect. Jurassic World will suddenly get even higher, on people's radars because Chris Pratt will be a movie star in the flesh, opposed to his little yellow plastic identity as Emmett in the Lego Movie. So I think you'll see a lot there. And also, if it succeeds, expect to see Rocket Raccoon everywhere. The theme parks, television, stuffed animals, merchandising, etc. You'll see, I think, a very successful, popular character. And I wonder what that will do for Bradley Cooper's career, because he, of course, is the voice of that character. And that, we've all heard the plans that Marvel wants to do spin-offs of each individual Guardian of the Galaxy. So will Rocket Raccoon get his own movie, perhaps? He has his own comic right now by Scotty Young, which is actually very, very good. At least the first issue. I really liked it, and I'll definitely be picking up the second. So that's what will happen if the movie succeeds. Now, if it flops, you're going to have a problem with Thanos. Just like if it succeeds, it'll help Thanos. If it flops, Marvel might be like, well, this is not great. People aren't interested in our big bad that we're all working all these movies toward. So that's one problem. Also, you'll have to see Marvel double down and just hunker down on their traditional superhero stories. And maybe say, instead of introducing these new concepts, we should just build around the Avengers. That's our team. We don't need another team. People have rejected this team. We just want to focus on the Avengers, and any other movies are, spin-offs from that. Their solo adventures outside of that team. Because think about it. Marvel so far has been very carefully, like Jenga, building their Avengers pyramid of movies. But Guardians of the Galaxy is a whole other structure. They might build a bridge eventually, and I'm sure they are hoping to build a bridge. They have in the comics where every Avenger takes their turn serving with the Guardians of the Galaxy, kind of like as an ambassador, I guess. Well, I wonder if that'll carry over to the movies. First it was Iron Man, and now, of course, it's Captain Marvel. I think Venom is up there too right now, aka Flash Thompson. But I think so. So I think that Jenga tower will collapse, and they'll just be like, let's just focus on the mothership, which is our Avengers line. So you'll see more Avengers. You won't see obscure characters getting introduced. You'll just see more Avengers and filling out that team and giving them solo movies and sequels, etc. Which, I think that seems very strong to me. So we'll see what happens with Guardians of the Galaxy. We'll see. And I also think if it flops, I don't know if that'll hurt the comics or not, because Marvel Studios could blame the comic books and say, oh, why'd you give us this crappy property? You should have warned us it doesn't work. And then Marvel Comics would be like, we did! We told you it doesn't sell. You wanted to prove that you were so much better than us and you could make it work. Well, no one can make it work. Sorry, Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning. Your stuff is only appreciated by very few. They're very good writers, but I guess this thing that they developed. So we'll see. We'll have our answer very soon. A lot of you are saying that you think it'll open at 100 million. There's no way it'll open at 100 million. It's untested. It's a new property. But for this movie to open, if it opens because it does have the Marvel backing behind it. If it opens anywhere near 100, that'll just be that's a success right there. People will just be shocked. Although the word from you, some of you who've seen it already coming in, it's a little cartoony, you're saying. So I'm not sure how it will play long term. But we'll see. I think anything 60, 70 above, maybe around 80 would be huge. We'll see. But it has to make its money pretty fast because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Expendables 3, all these movies are coming out right after it, and I think could seriously eat into its box office. I mean, that's valid competition. I think especially because it's going after the kiddie fan base, the kiddie superhero fan base, which Guardians of the Galaxy is making no qualms about really targeting instead of maybe a more broad audience. We'll see. We'll see. I'm curious. What are your thoughts? What are you leaning towards? Success or flop? What do you think will happen either direction? It's fun to hypothesize, especially because we'll have, as I said, our answers so soon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your question, Ben. Thank you, everybody. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, the viewer question, and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thank you so much. Bye.